Hello team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. I would say a co-stream. It's not being streamed live by Jonathan Fink, but he will upload it, I think, later. He is also not in his studio, if you like. He's out on the road. So this is an off-the-cuff live. I said to him, look, I wouldn't mind doing a live because I've got a really busy day and I actually have to shoot out to do a pub quiz, of all things, at the village hall. Therefore, I'm not going to be able to do any more videos, and I really want to talk about the aftermath of what happened in the White House last night. And no better person is there to speak to than Mr. Jonathan Fink. Although, having said that, I did have a wonderful conversation with Greg Terry last night. So I don't know.
I watched that, and I was actually glad that you did that, because initially you reached out, I think, to a few people. Yeah. I couldn't come on because I was busy uploading the video with Constantine, which died. I mean, usually his videos do really well. That one just died because no one was going to sit and watch that yesterday. So that was a bit of a shame.
All about the White House. All about
the White House. It's like, it was extraordinary how that sucks up all the oxygen. But Greg gave such an interesting perspective. I'm so kind of glad you got him on.
Yeah, no, that's really good. And actually, it was great to get Zhenya. Zhenya phoned me as a Ukrainian to express his just pure anger and pure, defense of Zelensky. And what you've got is this really interesting dynamic. This fallout has been Europe sans Viktor Orban circling the wagons and really supporting Zelensky very overtly. And you've got Ukrainians, by and large, most Ukrainians I'm hearing from have also come out defending Zelensky. Not all of them. Some of them like, oh, that's, bit of a faux pas or whatever. But most of them are actually really deeply in support of Zelensky, even if they weren't like Zelensky fans or whatever, because this is an attack on Ukraine in a sense. And so you're going to have to rally around a flag. And then in the US, you've got this really interesting situation whereby it's really dividing across party lines and whether you supported Ukraine very strongly anyway. I saw on Facebook this morning, Jonathan, more pro-Ukraine memes than I have ever seen throughout the course of this war, right? Honestly, since the beginning of this war, and now there's a selection bias, so my Facebook is going to be full of people that are probably more likely to support Ukraine, but these are people, a lot of them, that have never shown any support for Ukraine that I've seen before. And there are Ukrainian flags and memes and everything across there. So it's dividing across political lines in the US. And I think it's fascinating, the dynamics that are coming out. Sorry, over to you.
Let me say something contentious there, which is whichever side you're on, whether you're pro-Ukraine Republican and you're torn about, whether to criticize Zelensky's performance or not, or whether you are generally looking at the boorish behavior of Trump and Vance. And we'll talk about whether it was, planned that way in some way as a setup. We'll talk about that. What seems to me true, and this is, some people won't like this, is that very few people are thinking strategically. Very few people are thinking about what happens next and what's the next step strategic. What do you do next? And if that happens, what do you do? And if that happens, what do you do? People are reacting to the emotion of the moment. They're going along partisan lines. Yes, there's this outpouring of support, but it's emotional. Yeah, it's emotionally based. It's not rationally based. And it doesn't have the deep perspective. And I think it's worth reviewing what that deep perspective is. The deep perspective is that whatever happened yesterday, that Russia's not going to give up fighting because it thinks it can win. Even if there's a temporary peace, then Russia will continue as soon as it's rearmed.
But that's still true no matter what had happened yesterday.
It's still true no matter what would happen yesterday. Europe needs to step up. That is true no matter what happened yesterday. And what is also becoming abundantly clear, and this may influence why Zelensky lost it, because I think it's my point of view that he lost control of that situation. He lost control of himself. And if you're a crisis communications manager, that is not how you would have advised someone to handle it. Absolutely not. And it suggests, well, we'll go into that in a minute. But the other thing that is absolutely true, and which is not really being discussed, is it's become clear over the last couple of weeks that Trump does not have a plan for peace. What he has adopted is the Istanbul plan, Moscow's plan. That plan is to force Ukraine to capitulate, to emasculate it, to isolate it, and get it in a condition whereby chunks can be bitten off at a future time. Trump has adopted the Istanbul Protocol. It is not in Ukraine's interest. So everyone's going to focus on Zelensky and his performance and blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, this breakup was going to happen one way or another because Trump is aligned with a peace that is not acceptable.
I 100% agree with you, which is why I don't blame Zelensky for what he did yesterday. So I think to a degree, Zelensky let emotions get ahead of him. But two things to say about that. One, I think that was the right thing to do. Like at some point when you've been, and we'll go down that route in a second, but actually, I think the US were going to do this anyway, and this basically expedited an eventuality that was almost certain, right? And this also plays into the idea that it was a setup. This is kind of like exactly where, I wouldn't say Trump, but I'd say exactly where Vance and some of the other Project 2025 isolationist people, or isolationists or expansionists, depending on whether you're Greenland or Europe, but I think that this was an inevitability at some point. And so when you are a leader of a country, you're fighting for the existence of your people and your nation, and you are sitting there for 5 weeks and beyond into the campaign season, listening to these people slag you off, slag your country off, lie on television, national television, consistently, be called out by two other world leaders for lies, and then still lie in front of you.
And not any old lies. These are the lies of the invader, word for word for word.
Exactly. And then you have the US giving up power to Russia in terms of CIA, FBI, counterterrorism, counterintelligence, cutting to the DOD, USAID funding soft power, giving the keys of power to Russia and China. In the context of all of this, you've got this long line of being slagged off in public. And then you go into the lion's den and they gang up on you. Like, so if he capitulated and did the whole, well, he should have done this and he should have said this and he should have spoken like this, you would have just been prolonging the eventuality, and you would also be essentially advocating for disinformation being spread. You're like, no, it's fine for you to lie about me in public. That's fine for you to say these things that are outright Russian disinformation propaganda lines. It's fine for that. I'm going to kiss the ring. I don't think that's acceptable. So actually, I'm fine with him kind of, scare quotes, losing his cool, because actually I think that's justified. And I think it expedites an eventuality that was going to come about anyway.
I was slightly dissent because I don't think Zelensky went into that meeting thinking this is the day it all kicks off. He almost certainly knows that this process, a multi-stage process, will founder at some point, because the differences and the plan, such as it is, that the US is aligned behind, is unrealistic and unsustainable. I think it would have been better for him to pick the time and the place where he broke away from it. Yesterday, he did not. He went into that, and on his part, I think it was accidental. He lost control.
Yeah,
a statesman shouldn't have done that. I think he could still have pushed back, but he could have seemed in control, calm, and collected. And Vance and Trump would have looked like babies, and he would have still been the bigger person. So I think, and the difference there is preparation. English isn't his first language, not even his second language. I think that's a real problem as well.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because actually one of the biggest things, I think, Jonathan, is that English is his third language and he couldn't grasp the right things to say. So some of the things almost didn't make sense because he didn't have the right words. Yet when you saw him in the Fox News interview later, where he was a lot calmer and actually the questioning allowed him to elucidate himself more properly, and he had a translator to help him when those words were difficult for him, that was an excellent interview. interview. He nailed the Bret Baier interview. But in the White House, being attacked by these people, he didn't have good enough English to be able to communicate effectively.
And this is a strategy I've seen. Now, someone like Chodorkovsky does not speak good English, but in his public events, he always has a translator. And someone explained to me that this is a classic KGB technique. So even though someone like Putin, for instance, speaks fluent German, understands fluent German, he had a translator when speaking to Angela Merkel. He didn't have to. So why did he do that? It's because
gives him time.
While the translator is translating, you don't have to listen to that because you already know what's being said by interlocutor. It gives you a couple of seconds to calm your nerves, formulate your answer, and then you look like you're massively in control. A translator would have helped Zelensky to look like he was the man and in control. And that translator, if they didn't give the translator room to translate, that would have looked even more uncouth on the part of Vance and Trump. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two, I don't think they prepared. Now, look at that scenario there, the bear pit that was created. So many press people. I don't know if that's normal. It does not seem normal, that whole setup. It seems like a confrontational setup and with the sofa positioned so the attack dogs can come in.
Vance contributing was also not normal, but yeah.
Yeah, vice president contributing is absolutely not normal. So an expert who I appreciate, who understands, these things, said that the vice president never interjects on these occasions. It wasn't a matter of courtesy, as someone tried to say to me earlier, that Trump asked what Vance was thinking. It's a strategy, because normally Trump wouldn't give a rat's ass what Vance is thinking unless there's a purpose to bringing him in. The purpose here was good cop, bad cop, and I don't think they were expecting things to kick off in quite that manner, but they were certainly, I think, wanting to put Zelensky off his stride, imbalance him, and they wanted to diminish him and humiliate him. That was absolutely the purpose.
All three of them did lose their cool. Actually, you could tell naturally.
Oh, they all lost
all of them were angry. Micah here says somehow don't understand how JF is still defending Trump. Actually,
I'm not defending
he's not defending Trump,
but saying not defending Trump.
Yeah, but just saying that Zelensky could have played this better. But I don't know that he could have, because I think even capitulating there, like there are some people, and I think rightly saying it was like the mineral deal wasn't going to get signed. So, for example, Cenk Uygur here, who is a kind of a left winger who doesn't, particularly massively support Ukraine, does to a degree. Oh, sorry, I'm going to share this one instead. It turns out that what led to the tense meeting.
Putin out though. I mean,
he does. He's an interesting. Yeah. You're absolutely right. It turns out what led to the tense meeting at the Oval Office with Zelensky is that they told him that they were going to sign a security for minerals deal and instead offered no security guarantees and just wanted the minerals, lithium that goes into Tesla's batteries, etc. So there is an argument to say.
Actually, I said this on an episode. This is the first thing came out last night on the group chats we're part of, and I put it into an episode I've just put live. Something behind the scenes seemed to have already unnerved Zelensky before the event kicked off.
Yeah.
Therefore, it means that the ambush they set was definitely coordinated. The other interesting detail is there was a TASS correspondent, that's Russian state media correspondent in the room.
That's what I have next. Yeah.
That's not an accident. That is not an accident.
The White House blocked Associated Press and Reuters, and they let in TASS, right? And as Olivia Giuliana says, the White House blocked two major news agencies from covering President Zelensky's visit today, but somehow a Russian state media outlet, which wasn't supposed to have access, ended up in the Oval Office. In case you're wondering who is actually in control of the US. And then the third thing to add to this, which adds to the ridiculousness of the whole thing, the fact that it was a charade and that this was planned, is that you have this. Now, this is what so Zelensky, right off the bat, this was the first question.
Second question. My second question.
Or his second question.
First person. Why don't you wear a suit? Why don't you wear a suit? You're the highest level in this country's office, and you refuse to wear a suit. Just want to see if do you own a suit?
Yeah, problems.
A lot of Americans have problems with you not respecting.
I don't have such. I will wear costume after this war will finish.
Okay.
Yes, maybe one,
Maybe something
maybe
like this.
something like
Yes,
yours.
sir.
Yes,
That'd be great.
maybe something better. I don't know. We will see. Maybe something cheaper than, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So like that was the opening to this thing, right? And he's
Yes.
getting attacked. And of course, a couple of things to say. One, Churchill famously photographed at the White House wearing military garb. Second, Elon Musk was in the Oval Office and in the cabinet meeting wearing a cap and a t-shirt with a jacket over that, and no one batted an eyelid. In fact, they applauded him, and it was all like wonderful. So
this is a plant. This is a plant question. There's no question that this is designed to rile him up, and they knew something like this would have was coming down the track.
And that's Brian Glenn, who is a partner of, or the boyfriend of, Marjorie Taylor Greene. So this is like MAGA,
Green, of course, MAGA attack dog. Again, this is in no way supporting Trump, because Trump was uncouth, he was undemocratic, he was indecent, he didn't show any of the common courtesy that a leader inviting somebody else to their country would. I see it as victim abuse. Here you have the democratically mandated leader of a country at war who is experiencing the most appalling things and having to make the most difficult decisions of any leader on the planet today. What Vance and Trump did is quite literally victim blaming, and it is abuse. There's no other question for it, but we should not be surprised because they're not empathetic individuals. They're not moral individuals. Again, I'll come back to all these questions are not new. They're not new at all. If you go back and look at all the things Vance has said over the previous months, if you look at similar press events, and if you were a proper crisis communications manager, you'd have sat down and war gamed all of this. Then you would have taken Zelensky through it as a role play, and you would have agreed how to handle it. And you would have done a spectrum from, it could go like this, it could go really well, it could go south. What do you do, and what is your strategic objective out of that event? The strategic objective was completely destroyed because Zelensky clearly wanted to sign that minerals deal. He wanted to, and he hung around on the off chance that it would come back on the table. So he has effectively torpedoed his own strategic objective. It also seems clear to me that when they had the Lex Fridman interview, they wargamed this to destruction because they knew the kind of shallow, inane, triggering questions that would be asked. That was the whole purpose of the event. And I think they scripted and planned out the whole thing. So Zelensky was masterful and in control. They did not go through that process quite clearly here. And I don't believe they are consulting people who understand the Republican mindset. That's not to say I agree with it or that it's right or proper or anything like this. But if you want to perform at the top of your game and be in control in this kind of environment, you have to understand the people you're dealing with. And they're not doing that. They're not consulting with the experts.
Yeah, and I guess we'll never know because it's an alternative history. But I do agree with you. I think that there it does seem that they didn't gain that out in exactly the way you said. But I'm not sure it would have made any difference because if you gained out those accusations, you would still be trying to push back with truth and reality. And I think
would defer the moment. It would just defer the moment.
You maybe could have couched it better, but it would have still been, here's a claim, here's a counterclaim, bosh. And we saw Trump previously with Macron and Starmer, but with Macron, he's like, well, believe that if you want to. In other words, like, you're coming back with truth, and I'm just saying, well, he actually called out Macron effectively for lying, or for not telling the truth. Like,
that's right.
If you want to interpret that correctly, it's like, well, you can believe that if you want to, and doing like this in the middle of the speech. It's like,
and Starmer, basically, with Starmer, everyone says that was a masterful performance, but let's not forget that at the end of the press conference, Trump basically told him to shut up, cut him off, answer. And it's extraordinary effrontery and rude. So for all of those saying, oh, Zelensky didn't show deference and respect, Trump is out to demean and belittle the people he's speaking to, other world leaders. because he only has respect for tyrants. He only has respect for authoritarians or those who are richer than he is. It's that simple. He does not see any of these old world leaders as his peers in the same way that Vladimir Putin does not.
I've got 3 audios to play. I just want to establish that I think it was either like an opportunistic setup or it was a really properly orchestrated setup, but it was nonetheless some kind of a setup. So the first one is not an audio, but just to say the former British ambassador said that Zelenskyy was set up by the White House team during his meeting with Trump. Smith called the exchange astonishing and noted how deep Trump's resentment of Zelenskyy still runs. That is key. Zelenskyy, like Trump does not like Zelenskyy. So I think no matter what, I just think this was a foregone conclusion that just happened to be expedited. Referring to past tensions.
I don't know if like is the right word. Is like the right word. I think he does not see him as a peer. He does not appreciate any of the leadership characteristics we see. For Trump, they have no value. He sees him as lesser and not worthy of, any kind of deference or respect or generosity. I don't know if like comes into it. But he treats him as an underling, basically.
Because I'm not really sure that Trump particularly likes anyone. Like he has like admiration for people that he wants to be like, but I don't think he's like. I don't think
he likes anybody.
Yeah,
he doesn't like himself. Yeah.
So this is Susan Rice, a former ambassador, and I think she's on point.
Let's step back and analyze what's happened here. I think there's no question that this was a setup. You heard Donald Trump say at the end of that clip you played, this is great television. This was a setup. Volodymyr Zelenskyy was compelled to agree to a horrible deal that would have sent Ukraine's minerals to the United States without any concrete security guarantees. And yet, because he was trying to improve a relationship with Donald Trump, he came to Washington, he came to the Oval Office and sat down for a meeting, hat in hand. And soon after he got there, the vice president of the United States lit into him and started a confrontation. Now, I've been in countless Oval Office meetings with heads of state, presidents and vice presidents, as national security advisor, as UN ambassador, and in other roles. I can tell you that the vice president or the secretary of state or anybody else, they don't jump in, hijack a conversation without the express blessing of the president of the United States. So J.D. Vance did that deliberately. Donald Trump knew what he was going to do. And I think, as he said at the end, because he can't, help himself, this was a setup for the cameras. It was a play to his base, but above all, it was a play to Vladimir Putin, to show fealty to Vladimir Putin.
And I just want to just a little bit more from her, just back here, I think.
Potentially Europe to Putin on a silver platter.
Why?
That's a great question.
Oh, no, it wasn't that bit. It was this bit.
Things, if you're familiar with that podcast, it was insane.
Yeah, Nicole, I think we have to understand that what happened today is really a piece of a larger puzzle. We've seen this building, frankly, since before the Trump returned to office. But literally, so much of what he has done in his first 5 weeks in office have been to the benefit of Russia and China. So let's review the bidding. Threatening our ally, Denmark and Greenland. Starting a trade war with our closest allies and partners, trying to, create a conflict with Canada and trying to pretend to relegate it to the 51st state. Vance going to Munich and basically trying to blow up the NATO alliance, pulling the United States Agency for International Development 100% off the map and retreating. Proposing to cut 8% a year from the Department of Defense and literally dismantling the federal government and eviscerating it. That is not in any way, shape, or form in the national security interests of the United States. We are.
Okay, so that I absolutely agree with all that, and there's just one more I want to show you as well. This is Elliot Cohen, who's absolutely great, and Edelman as well. Really, really rate these guys in terms of national security and international geopolitics.
I mean, my tendency is to think that this was something of a setup, probably by Vance. Is that your view too?
It was absolutely a setup. I think, you know, I don't know whether it was concerted with the president beforehand or whether Vance was knowing the buttons to push with Trump, decided to resolve whatever lingering interagency differences there might be among, you know, Rubio and Waltz and Vance and others in the administration. But it was calculated. And I'm appalled that people like Lindsey Graham and others are saying, oh, Zelensky, you know, rose to the bait, you know, he shouldn't have done that, you know, or this was somehow his fault. This was a kind of calculated ambush. Again, I don't know whether Trump was in on it from the get-go or whether, you know, Vance did it, as I said, to, you know, for his own policy reasons. But, you know, as you and I were discussing before we came on, Neville Chamberlain and Edward Daladier dealt with greater deference and subtlety with Edward Beneš, the president of Czechoslovakia in 1938 at Munich, than these two, you know, schoolyard bullies did with Zelensky, and with Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio, supposedly tough guys, you know, about Russia, looking on. Not only that, piling on, you know, after the fact, Rubio tweeting out, "Thank you, Mr. President, for standing up for America first in the Oval Office." You know, he's also made the point.
And we'll leave it there. But all of that, I think, is really salient.
Well, I want to take issue with the second speaker there, and this is what I see both on those who are opposed to Trump and those aren't. We're still giving him a pass. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't. He is the puppet master here.
Yeah.
None of this stuff happens without him. Vance wouldn't independently go on the attack unless it was mandated and sanctioned. Who is the one who in the 1980s had Russian gangsters renting or buying his condos? Who is the one that visited Moscow and almost certainly was tried to be recruited for the KGB? Who is the one who's driven this for the last 30 years? Who is the one who wanted right from the get-go to dismantle NATO and withdraw the US from its international obligations? There is a consistency through all this that suggests that everything here is driven by Trump, and Trump is driven by some things that we don't know. He is a Russian agent. Yes, that is the simplest answer. Let's cut through Occam's razor. I've gone on about Helsinki and the body language there.
Yeah, I would differentiate the words agent from asset. And I would say he's probably more likely an asset than an agent, which means that he's not necessarily knowingly like in cahoots with Russia. Russia's phoning him up saying, can you do this? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And blah, blah, blah. He's more like easily manipulated by Russia, and he's in their ecosystem and is just a consistently easy to manipulate human.
It's more like gangsters, right? Gangster A and Gangster B might realize they're in competition with each other, and that competition might be hostile and might have sort of, you know, areas of delineation. What they both understand is they are against the rule of law and the cops, right? This is what we're looking at here. I think it's almost, there's no point in splitting hairs about whether it's an agent, asset, or whatever. We won't know probably ever what the details of that are. What's quite clear is he's aligned with an authoritarian way of doing business. He's aligned with the world's autocrats, whether it's through self-interest or compromat or a combination of the two. It's almost immaterial at this point because he is against rule of law. He's against NATO. He's against the international order. Where this was always going was to try to throw Ukraine under the bus and dismember it at some point in the interests of Russia. That was always the plan. And we have to ask ourselves, rather than constantly litigating this, What comes next? What comes next is also equally obvious, and that is a complete withdrawal from NATO and a concerted attack on the EU, because the only thing that can get in the way of Trump, that can get in the way of Putin and get in the way of this autocratic world is Europe, UK, and the rules-based order and values we still adhere to, and our support for Ukraine. We are the next target. So let's move on from all the arguments and arm the fuck up, close the skies over Ukraine, and start fighting alongside Ukraine. Maybe not soldiers on the ground, but we need to get serious now.
Yeah, before I get to that, just a little bit more litigation. One thing that I find interesting, or at least like not litigation, but trying to understand, this is understanding what's happened. I think it's also worth knowing that I don't think anyone ever stands up to Donald Trump publicly in like a cabinet meeting, a White House meeting, whatever it is.
No,
and you saw that from that Elon Musk cabinet meeting the other day, which is who thinks he's not doing a good job, and everyone's applauding. And it's basically, if you had put Kim Jong-un in that seat and had that transplanted to Pyongyang, it would have looked exactly the same. And then as the journalists were going out, he literally goes to a journalist, "Are you going to report this as absolutely brilliant, please? Can you say it's unbelievable?" So literally, I'm dictating to you how you're going to report this. Everyone's clapping. I don't think anyone has ever publicly disagreed with Trump. And so he's not used to disagreement, just from a purely kind of public point of view. He rallies all the time. He makes sure that he doesn't get difficult questions from critical media, and then says to his press secretary, critical media need to be out of the press pool, blah, blah, blah. And we're not having critical media in the Pentagon, etc., etc. So when someone publicly stands up to him and Vance, they're actually not too used to it. And that plays into the dynamics yesterday. I found it interesting that Adam Bolton, the former Sky News political journalist, who is not a left winger, not, he's, anyway, said, quote, JD Vance is a piece of shit. And I was like, I love that. That's good reporting. Thank you. And actually went on Times Radio and repeated that. So, so the question then is, where do we go? Before we get to that, I just do want to play you one more bit. This is very short, it's like 20 seconds. But to me, this sums up so much. This is Jesse Waters from Fox News, whom I absolutely despise. But
I loathe him as much as Vance, actually. He's a ghastly piece of shit.
Yes, 100% agreement. But this is his take.
We run the world. This is America's world. He's our proxy. This ends when we say it ends. It doesn't end when Zelenskyy, if he wants to go it alone, go it alone. I'm glad we helped him. Russia invaded. We got his back. At first, it was the right thing to do. But now it's not. Now the war's over, and he doesn't recognize it's over. And reality is going to eat this guy alive if he doesn't recognize this.
So he says the war is over, which is ridiculous in and of itself, just empirically. But like, we run the world. This is America's world. It's our proxy. I just found that absolutely staggering. And
this
so
is
if you imagine
the Kremlin's conception of how things are. Over the years, we've said that we are not the puppets of the US. Yes, they do have huge amounts of influence, and yes, they can lean on the scales at times, but most presidents choose not to, do it in that kind of coercive fashion. So there's an element to that, but there's an element of truth there, but that's not how America's exercised its power. What you have here is a complete change in not the nature of the power and the scale of it, but in the exercise of that power, from a partnership mentality to a pure gangster mentality. So in that respect, he's exactly reflecting how Trump has taken the US towards his view of the world and not adapted himself to what the US was before he started corrupting it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think one of the observations that came out was actually if you look at where it all started going wrong, because actually the first this was a long interaction in the Oval Office, and it didn't start going wrong until like 9 minutes from the end, but I think it's like 45 minutes worth. So actually there was a lot of generally like meaningfully decent enough conversation, and then Vance got involved and it all went south. And where he got involved, the most telling video, says Jonathan Liss, I won't play it, but everyone wants a ceasefire, so Zelensky explains what became of the last one, and for this Vance brands him disrespectful. Zelensky's crime wasn't disrespect, it was refusing to pay homage, telling the truth and answering back. And that's exactly right. But the nub of that was the demand for a ceasefire. So all the US wants, or all Trump wants, is I want the war to stop. Too many people dying. Good people are dying on both sides. Blah 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 blah. It's like, we want peace. It's terrible. Domes, rubble. All the cities are destroyed, blah, blah, blah. So he's A, doesn't actually understand what's going on, and B, just because of that veneer understanding, just thinks, oh, it's a terrible war, we got to stop it because I want the Nobel Peace Prize. And in stopping
and let's not forget, he wants to make money out of it.
Yeah, so that's just
when
what's
the war
going on.
stops, he can make money off both sides. While the war's going on, he cannot.
Yes, exactly. So there's no desire to do anything that's to the benefit of Ukraine. Whereas if I was trying to sort out, this is why in the Fox interview, Zelensky kept on talking about a just peace now and security guarantees. Trump couldn't give a toss, right? He's like, I want to make money out of this, and so therefore we need a peace, and we need it quickly, and we need people to stop dying because then I'll get a Nobel Peace Prize. I think, and this sounds maybe a little bit patronizing, but I think in that Fox interview, he talked consistently about just peace and security guarantees. I think you need to explain what both of those things mean to the audience, right? I really do think, like, if people just hear just peace, they're like, what's the difference between just peace and peace? No, he wants peace. He wants a ceasefire, Trump, right? But I want a just peace, which means that there needs to be justice for what Russia has done. And we need to understand that they are the bad guys. And so when we have peace, the peace needs to be looking at how can we reconcile the fact that they've done all these horrible things, and how do we get land back for Ukraine that is rightfully theirs. That is justice, not just stop fighting, everybody put down your guns, and whatever land you're standing on at the moment is what you own. Right, which is not just, right. And then security guarantees, they need to explain it. Yeah, and then you can talk about long-term peace, ceasefires, and and then so here Zelensky was talking about, hang on, for the last 15 years they've broken 25 like ceasefires or whatever. This is, we cannot trust them, and yet you're demanding that we just do a ceasefire, to which JD Vance then goes off on one. But Zelensky was absolutely justified in pushing back on that. And also the explanation of a security guarantee. What does that actually mean? Do most of the public understand why Zelensky is balking at not signing a minerals deal? But it sounds like obvious to us because we talk about security guarantees and stuff like this all the time, but the American public or the international public need to understand that, well, we don't want to sign this because all this is just a deal for America to get hold of our natural resources. What we need is a security guarantee. And by the way, what that means is if we have peace, that if Russia attack us again, then there is a deterrent to stop them doing that. So actually, if they do attack, then Article 5 will kick in and NATO will come to defend us in person, or some other kind of agreement that's functionally
I would say none of that. I mean, at this point, no agreement, such as it is, really matters too much. It's action that matters, and I think Zelensky understands that. Trump's position here, to be clear, is offering something far weaker than the Budapest memorandums, and is equally taking something from Ukraine, just as nuclear weapons and its deterrent was taken from it. Here they are taking the natural resources and wealth and giving nothing in return. No promises for new munitions, no security guarantees of any sort, and crucially, no backstop for European partners, which is a crucial thing for Macron to be able to commit French troops to peacekeeping. So there is nothing in here which would deter Putin or protect Ukraine. And of course, it seems that behind the scenes, they promised one thing, lured him to Washington, kept it quite ambiguous, and then, clearly withdrew some of the things he'd been led to believe would be linked to it. This was going to happen anyway, because I don't think Trump is going to give not just the guarantees, because an agreement is nothing. An agreement is nothing for Putin. What matters for Putin is planes in the sky, troops on the ground, and physical force pushing him back. The Western allies that want to save themselves and Ukraine now need to understand that no agreement, no negotiation, no words can resolve this situation. Only the determination to show will and force to Putin. Nothing else is going to work at this point. The rest is wasting time.
I agree, and Shane Markovits talks to this. The real problem in the Trump administration is offering next to nothing to Ukraine. If Washington's position is just surrender for the sake of a ceasefire without concessions from Russia, weapons, or real security guarantees, then plenty of other countries can negotiate that bad deal for Ukraine. Such a good point. Like anyone, why is the US involved? Because anyone could do that. Just stop fighting and give everything to Russia. And he continues. Zelensky's retort to Vance was polite.
Trump says because I'm me and Biden was Biden and Putin's going to listen to me. I mean, the level of delusion there. Either he's completely disingenuous, which I think is probably the more likely, or he's completely delusional. I think it's more disingenuous because he understands Putin's gangster mindset, because that is his mindset and that is his view of the world. It's extractive, it's avaricious, and it respects no laws. It only respects strength. He understands that world. So he must know that Putin does not mean, is not committed to peace. He must know that.
Yeah, and Markovits continues, Zelensky's retort to Vance was polite, diplomatic, restrained. He merely clarified and tried the diplomatic route before, but Russia violated, and that's why they want a stronger deal now. Otherwise, Moscow will use time to rebuild and attack again. Vance exploded because he can't stand losing an argument, to which Shashant Joshi rightfully said Trump's position is incoherent. It's that minerals deal is itself a guarantee. Russia's not going to mess with our people when we're there, and the vague hints that security might be discussed post-deal, with absolutely no assurance of anything concrete. Risk is that Trump conditions continued aid on deal. So just on that first point, though, that's what Zelensky picked him up on, is like, that's not a security guarantee. Like, we've already had American companies in both occupied territories and Ukrainian territories, and Russia didn't give a toss, right? So do you think a security guarantees is us?
More than that, American companies had tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in investments in Russia that were lost when Putin launched the full-scale war. So this is a complete straw man argument. Nothing at all about having an American investment in a country is a deterrent to a dictator like Putin. Nothing. So it's an absurd argument.
So the question is, okay, going forward, what does Europe do? And we get possibly one of the most important meetings in modern history taking place tomorrow in London with Keir Starmer and European leaders and Zelensky. Interestingly, Zelensky travelled straight to the UK last night. After that, they went straight to the UK, didn't hang around to see if the minerals deal would be signed, did a Fox News interview, which was good, came to the UK, met with some Ukrainian diaspora community and also with Starmer. Starmer has a chance of being at the center of what happens going forward. So there's an interesting conversation to be had from a UK political point of view about this being good for Starmer's kind of PR and putting himself, and also that continued relationship with Europe and maybe a growing closer relationship with Europe. So there's some interesting dynamics to be explored there. But then, and sadly, I don't think there are Baltic leaders, and it may be just we need the big leaders from Europe, and we need to be able to get things sorted out kind of quickly. And the more leaders there are, the less time people have to speak, etc., etc. I don't know whether that's a wise thing not to include the Baltics. I don't know exactly who's going to be there, but you're going to have some big leaders. You've had Giorgia Meloni coming out with an interesting thing, saying we need a conference, we need a symposium with the US, Europe, and I guess Ukraine there to talk about, look, what's going on, let's thrash this out, get this all out in the open.
I'm not sure that'll work. I mean, at this point, it's Europe needs to take some unilateral actions. I think including the US in that is, I mean, maybe she'd go on a mission herself, which might be useful to the US, but I don't think having a symposium with the US, that's just dragging it out and not accepting reality. I mean, the most obvious reason why he came to the UK immediately is because he wanted a decent pint of beer and not the kind of lager piss they have in the US. And after that session, he needed a decent beer.
He would just want a nice dark beer. Like, we've been in Ukraine and we've had some lovely dark. Lviv does a good dark beer, and I think he just I think you're absolutely
decent
right.
Pint of Guinness, that'll sort him out. Yeah.
So so there are a couple of opportunities or a couple of options here. Sorry, one of them is, and lots of people have been calling this for a long time, but some people are now saying, well, actually, caution to the wind now. $300 billion, 300 billion euros, get those frozen Russian assets straight to Ukraine. So there's been this worry that it will affect investment and then blah, blah, blah. But actually, if you know, it's like, right, we've got backs to the wall. That's an easy kind of win, surely. Yeah. So I wonder whether they're going to be discussing that tomorrow. The other thing is possibly putting Europe onto a quasi-war footing. Like saying, right, we need to start having conversations with our industrial base to say, look, we are going to have unilateral kind of power over you, like France has already done. Interestingly, they did this early in the war with certain elements of their defense and military base, industrial base, which I think means that they can tell like whoever's making the Caesars that you need to do this because we're telling you to do it, not from your own free market point of view. And I don't know how much they've used that, but they have at least started putting that in place, and that's been going for some time now. Other European nations, I think, could go, right, yeah, let's start putting legislation in place or whatever, such that we can start kicking out some serious industrial produce to support Ukraine, and actually that might also really stimulate the economies as well. In the same way that Russia has used that to buoy its own economy up over the course of the war, but obviously the Europe will not be under sanctions, so we'll have a functioning free market economy, but also let's throw some of our money into our own defense industrial base to support Ukraine much more formally and much more robustly.
And let's use some of that 300 billion in conjunction with Ukraine to invest in its defense sector, but have co-projects with Europe. Because I think Ukraine integrated with not just democratic institutions, but with the entire security architecture of Europe is the inevitable end goal of this and a necessity. So let's not sort of fight around. Let's get there faster. Also, a nice bit of Keynesianism would be good to stimulate the economy. And that 300 billion could help, because I think if we just do this out of budgetary funds, we're not going to get there fast enough or on the scale. And to those leaders that are potentially listening or paying attention to this, Putin is not going to stop. The next target for Trump and the axis of authoritarians is the EU, and it's going to be a full broadside, because what we're also getting in the way of with Trump is, yes, he may be aligned with an authoritarian agenda. He may be doing things which are highly beneficial to Putin. Some of those things are perceived to be beneficial to the US by his base. That, of course, is highly, that can be disputed and litigated endlessly. But he does need to also bring prices down for his base and his consumers. Otherwise, he's going to get slaughtered in the, I think, is it the congressional elections that are coming up? So certainly in 2 years, there's another election in the US.
Midterm elections in November 2026. Yeah.
Midterm elections. He's going to lose a majority there, and it's going to make his program, especially of tax cuts and so on, very difficult to pass. He needs to get prices down. He needs to get the economy moving. How does he do that? Why did he go to Saudi Arabia? Well, I think we now have to look at oil as well, because part of this deal isn't just minerals. That's a little bit of smoke and mirrors. The real deal that's going on here is potentially collusion between Russia and the US to restart business with Saudi Arabia to drop oil prices, which is what Trump needs to get the sort of get inflation under control. So there are some interesting and strong sort of, I think, economic factors as to why he is desperate for peace, not just his own personal aggrandizement, but he will not be able to get command or control of the US economy, and all these tariffs and stuff are causing instability unless he can kickstart hydrocarbon trading with Russia on a massive scale.
One of the other things I was saying yesterday on top of that, so the best hope, and it sounds horrible, for Trump to change his tune or to be distracted or something, is an economic kind of collapse of the US. And he's doing everything he can to expedite that by having trade wars with everyone, particularly neighbors, and the best, EU, Canada, Mexico. So that's going to be inflationary. He's also sacking loads of government workers, which is going to add massively to a very poor jobs, or is going to make a very poor jobs report, which is going to then add pressures to
as
that.
well. You know, tax intake will go right down.
Or tax intake will go down. That will be an absolute killer. But also, you are going to see Europe double down on their own defense industry and reject the US industry. And we heard in a Times article that US government, non-Trumpist, I presume, government officials have already warned the UK to start thinking about not buying American, right, for security reasons. Now, that is fascinating. Ryan Macbeth has just done a video where he said Trump's treatment of Zelensky may have just cost us India's F-35 deal and an Australian Virginia-class submarine deal. So already there might be some things hitting the fan. It's interesting to note that Germany's foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, who's a massively strong supporter of Ukraine, has just done a 12-minute speech that I've linked in the chat, and that's been translated by German Aid to Ukraine. And he said it's just given a really remarkable, nearly 12-minute speech. So she's been going off on one. We know that Scholz is going tomorrow to UK, and Merz isn't. Merz wasn't invited. I think he should have been, and I think they should have gone together. But Scholz did phone Merz last night. They have talked about. I think there will be collaboration. It's not going to be like domestic partisan stuff. So you know, going back to the economy thing though, if defense industrial contractors and corporations and concerns start giving Trump hassle because the foreign policy is going to hurt them in the pocket, then and if the stock market has something to say about this, then Trump will start losing popular support, and he'll get a spank on his wrist by industry. And I think that is your best option for Trump getting a reality bite.
I think definitely. And at this point, I think Britain should forward-looking. I know we renewed Trident not too long ago. The next generation of nuclear deterrent, we should look to co-produce it with France and move on from the US relationship. And if we can defer any payments that may be due for the new generation of Trident, maybe we should look at deferring those and channeling it to. Now, I'm completely off base here. I mean, I have no idea when any of this is possible, but I think we need to start looking seriously at everything and every assumption that underpins the relationship with the US and the stability of it, because Trump is Trump and Putin is Putin. But we know in Russia that there are 1,000, little Putin clones ready to pop up and, succeed after him. We don't have the delusion that things will get dramatically better. It'd be nice if they did, but we're not counting on it. Unfortunately, we perhaps need to take that same approach to the US, that it may be dysfunctional for years, if not decades, to come. It's time, yes, for Europe to bring back its primary industries, its strategic industries, and stop thinking in this global sense, a sort of global ecosystem of low or minimal threat. And we need to bring a lot of that stuff back in the way that Turkey and Finland never really, let go of strategic industries.
Yeah, so we might have this big $200 billion fund changes to the European way of doing financing. There might be some budget to mess around with, as you talked about. We don't want to be getting stuff from our budget, particularly. There's not stuff. We need other ways to generate income. Interesting.
War bonds, something like war bonds, maybe.
Republican Congressman Don Bacon has broken ranks with MAGA to rip into the catastrophic Oval Office screaming match. So that's good news. You want some of that. We're going to go through some super chats and whatnot to just react to things. But while the EU and European and Ukrainian leaders are meeting tomorrow, it's worth noting that after that, big White House fracas yesterday, Trump is working hard to sort things out by jetting off to Mar-a-Lago to play golf. So there you go. Good stuff there.
Let's also put the Jiggers Paw link in, because again, in all of this, it's worth noting that Ukraine is still fighting. Ukraine needs drones, it needs vehicles, it needs everything to help keep it in the fight. It's quite clear, and it's been quite clear for some time, that this fight will continue, I think, through 2025. It may even continue until Russia collapses in some way or loses its consistency on the battlefield, and has internal problems. So Ukraine needs all this stuff urgently, desperately.
Absolutely. So we're sort of joined. We're slightly different totals that we're going for. We have just reached our total. Thank you so much for that. So we're probably going to add another drone onto that so that we can also have what I'd planned was a raffle for some cool stuff that Jigga's looking into. So this is likely to go up, so you can still donate to that. But remember, when you do, and I'll show your one in a second, when you do donate, remember to press copy whatever comment it is, whether it's my one or Jonathan's. You need to copy the comment to put it into the payment system field or reference. But if we go to projects here, hopefully your one is now in there. And I think you had a nice big contribution initially as well. So
whoever did that, massive thank you. I mean, absolutely incredible.
So we have here you are. Whoop. So your goal is 10,500, and so that'll be 3 drones there. And these are thermal drones that are really, really important, really useful. They're Mavic 3Ts, and already a really generous supporter there. So thank you to whoever that was, from Switzerland by the looks of it. Oh, no, not Switzerland, CH. No, that is
that'd be
Switzerland. That's Switzerland. Switzerland. Yeah. Sorry.
No, so tremendous. Whoever did that,
amazing. Yeah. So please help out with that. Right, let's go through some super chats and whatnot. Goose Springsteen, I think Trump resents Zelensky, and I completely agree with this, by the way. And I think it's massively important for not investigating the Biden family as Trump requested during his first term. That and the impeachment made Ukraine a partisan political football. 150% agreement there. And I think Trump in this case holds a grudge, and and therefore I don't think there's anything that Zelensky can do. This goes back to like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I think this was always going to happen, partly because of resentments like this. So Goose, thank you for the super chat, but I absolutely agree, and I think it's probably more important than people give it credit for being.
I think it is. He's a very petty, narcissistic individual. I mean, obviously there is a pattern of pro-Russian narratives. There's a pattern of pro-Russian behavior. We won't know whether that was also inevitable or not. But I think this vendetta, as it were, is underplayed, and it plays a key role. He's not forgiven Zelensky. The minute it kicked off in the Oval Office, all the Russian narratives, all the resentment that is clearly there, it boiled up immediately, and it hasn't gone anywhere.
Kathy's guess, I love the Fox interview he did afterwards. He collected himself wonderfully. Absolutely. I think it's really worth. I shared it on my, if you haven't watched it, it is on my community tab or whatever on the channel, and it's so United 24 put it on their channel live, so that was really cool. It's well worth watching. I actually watched it at 2 times speed because actually it makes his English even more fluent there. So but yeah, he did do a good job. Both Jonathans are on point. Thank you, Marino. It makes a change. So Kevin Force, thank you so much for your generosity with the ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thank you, matey. Taryn McKeej. So people blaming Zelensky for what happened in the Oval Office are the same ones blaming Ukraine for the war. I don't necessarily think. Well, depends what you mean by blame. No. Actually,
I'm not blaming Zelensky.
Yeah,
at all.
But he is right. Therefore, that the people who are blaming Zelensky, you're saying that Zelensky could have done it better, but he was entrapped, and this was all part of the plan.
I'm saying he didn't.
I'll continue while he's just gone blank. So people blaming Zelensky for what happened in the Oval Office are the same ones blaming Ukraine for the war. I'm so ashamed of my country. Beware the bully worship infecting America. It threatens Europe too. And I think that's really interesting, Taryn, because that's what we saw from Jesse Waters in the Fox clip that I played just earlier. I think there is this idea of being a bully that you could see drip down to some of those in that ecosystem who are Trump supporters, which is, kind of USA. I'm like, yeah, we are the number one, and we're going to show it. and we're going to brashly show it. And if you don't do what we say, screw you, you little squit, that kind of thing. So yeah, I do get that, but thank you for that, Taryn, and that's a really salient point as well, because I think, yeah, the people who blame Zelensky are, I think the whole thing from last night just falls along party lines. If you're a really strong support, generally, you're really strong supporter of Ukraine, you're going to be standing by Zelensky. And if you're wanting an excuse to blame Ukraine, weirdly, then you are going to take that. And I think that's exactly what has happened. What I do think is a shame is that there's probably a percentage of people who are Ukraine supporters who will also have been appealed away by thinking it was Zelensky's fault. And I think that will be a shame. I don't know what percentage that would be, but I'm sure there will be some people, and that will be a huge
think we need to move on from that. Another very dangerous reaction I've seen is from those who are extremely pro-Ukraine, but are, making excuses for Trump, etc. Some have started saying Zelensky needs to go. That is a Russian narrative. That is a Russian strategy. That is suicidal at this point. And people who are saying that should really, really stop and think about what they're doing.
That's a really good point. So I was thinking about this morning, Jonathan, which is to say that all this shows is that you're not really interested in Ukraine. If you want Zelensky to resign, it means that which would almost certainly damage Ukraine, right? It would be an absolute nightmare for Ukraine. So if you really wanted that to happen, what you are saying is, I want Ukraine to be screwed over a little bit now, or massively now, and you're saying it's more important that JD Vance gets his way. Like, oh, it's more important that Zelensky kowtows and says, oh, please, oh, thank you, than the strategic reasons that are in place for why the frick the US are supporting Ukraine in the first place. And this is what's being forgotten here. It's like, let's get back to why you're supporting. There's no such thing as a free lunch here. Like, the US supported Ukraine because it was in their interest to support Ukraine right from the beginning of the war. Their hegemonic, geopolitical, strategic interest to support Ukraine. And if you're pissing about, talking about like, oh, you haven't said thank you enough, then you are doing, as Jonathan says, which is you're repeating Russian narrative talking points here, and you are doing the bidding of Russia. Let's get back to why you supporting Ukraine in the first place, and that should be all that matters. It doesn't matter whether you have a little tiff in the White House. What should matter is like what is going on in the world and whose side you are on. And if you're going to use that an excuse to get on Russia's side, it means you were never on Ukraine's side in the first place, and it means that your strategic objectives are completely aligned with Russia.
I know people who are definitely pro-Ukraine who are falling into this trap. So it'd be a little more nuanced there. But what I would say to them is you're missing what's really going on here. You're missing the fact that Trump is going to be pushing, or has been pushing, a peace plan that is architected by Russia. And if you carry on making excuses for Trump, if you carry on believing that there is some traction that can be had there and a way to peace through Trump, then unfortunately we part company on that. We can talk about it, we can discuss it and debate it, but essentially we no longer agree on the same reality. The reality here is that Trump wants Ukraine to capitulate. It wants Russia to achieve some of its maximalist goals, and they simply want peace to happen so they can screw both parties potentially for as much money as they can while that temporary peace lasts. That's the game that's being played. So if you want to perpetuate that, fine, fill your boots. But at some point, that's not sustainable. It's not a strategy Ukraine should kowtow to. We need to find another way for Ukraine to win. The US way is a dead end. It's a cul-de-sac. It's actually a suicide route.
Yeah. So back to the super chats, and thank you for these. Rick from the Netherlands. If you look up narcissistic personality syndrome, you will understand why Trump acts as he does and did yesterday. His condition makes him unfit for POTUS. What is the excuse for people like JD Vance? That is ideological. This is exactly what JD Vance wants ideologically. So the excuse was not an excuse. He actually wants that to happen. That is really problematic. So yeah, the other thing that someone said to me, and I would love to read out the comment, but I don't have it lined up. But someone said to me, "I've got dyslexia, and here are some of the issues." And I think Trump has dyslexia. And there are some people that have talked about this previously because he does struggle reading out auto cues, and that's why he goes off on one so often. And he struggles with some of those words, and then he realizes he's made a mistake because it makes no sense, and blah blah blah. So someone listed like all the issues they have and all the issues Trump seems to have, and it went a really long way to explaining why he keeps going back to things like 350 billion dollars. Is because it's not that he knows he's being corrected, but then he can't actually grasp these numbers and goes back to these default things. So it's not like he's purposefully lying, but actually it's part of his cognitive setup. And anyway, I would need to look into that. I don't know enough about individual traits of dyslexia and how varied they are, but the comment from someone who said that they had those issues and how similar it was.
There's more than dyslexia going on here. I mean, that does not explain everything. I mean, the
oh no, yeah, there's
traumatic childhood.
All of that.
There's layers of weirdness.
100%. Yeah. Just a few more, Jonathan. Rick again. Trump does not care about Zelensky. True. Putin. True. Or the US. True.
Partly
he cares
true.
about himself. Partly true. I think he doesn't care about Putin, but he wants to be Putin, and he admires Putin's ability to be a dictator. Like when, again, and I know I've said this to you many times before, guys, but go and listen to interviews of the NBC producer who produced the Apprentice program for Trump, where they created Trump's persona. They basically created what you see now. They are responsible for unleashing this beast. And they created the persona of this businessman, this successful businessman, even though it actually really wasn't in many contexts. They looked at his actual CEO office and said, this is terrible, it's disgusting. We're going to create our own one instead. And they produced this entity that is Donald Trump. But Donald Trump loved it. There's an interesting, somebody did an author who wrote a book on him, and got to speak to him lots, and it was mainly about The Apprentice and stuff, said that Donald Trump was prouder of being on The Apprentice than he was of being president for the first term. So the thing in his life that was the highlight of his life was being on The Apprentice. Why? Because he gets to fire people. He says, you're fired. He's the dictator. So then when you see these hot mic incidents with Steve Doocy on a plane where he says, Kim Jong-un, the great thing about him is people stand up with a straight back whenever he speaks. I want that for my people. You know, he's literally on camera saying this. So we know that Trump likes these dictators. He wants to be a dictator. You listen to Turnbull, the previous Australian president, who talks very candidly about being in the same room as Trump with Putin and saying he's like a little kid. It's almost creepy. It's creepy at how much adulation this guy gives to Putin. Right? And it's disturbing. So that is what is going on there. Anyway, it's about how I can look powerful, and don't you dare disagree with me. Absolutely.
And there's a subtext here: is how can I look powerful? That implies that he does not feel powerful. He's quite literally got more power than any other human being on the planet, more power than almost any human being in history. He has complete control over the political environment in the US, which is also unprecedented. And Putin, I think, fears him potentially. He does not feel powerful. And so he projects this sort of rage and inferiority complex. He projects this sort of almost sort of capricious vulnerability, because he does not feel that he inhabits that role that he's managed to, dare I say, blag his way into.
Well, and the question is why? And he doesn't feel that because he lives in a freaking democracy, or at least he did until a month ago. Yeah. And all of the checks and balances and the free press, they are what keeps him from feeling like he has the power he wants to have. And so, you know, that is why he's removing those things, because he wants that ultimate power. Right, just a couple more as mentioned. Hi JP, after all the stuff, thank you Marcus Laboschka, after all the stuff I've written and thought about totalitarianism, I wonder how long the US citizens will take Musk and Trump's state takeover attempt. Well, we're watching this in real time, right? So at some point, well, okay, rewind. I could bore you with all the things they are doing behind the scenes, but there's more happening in terms of the destruction of the republic, or of the democratic republic, if you like, of the US. So much is happening behind the scenes that's truly disturbing, and it is a move towards authoritarianism. And so the question, how long can this go on before the population, get annoyed about this? The problem is, this is your information bubbles. If you live in a Fox News environment, you are not going to know about half the stuff that's going on, and the stuff that is going on will be interpreted to you in a way of, this is really good for the country and Trump is doing wonderful things. And so this is why whenever we talk about politics and geopolitics, we're all often talking about information ecosystems and disinformation and how this comes about. And it's why we talk about different media sources, and why I'm obsessed with stuff like that, because people's beliefs are generated not out of thin air. You don't wake up with a belief just based on rational cogitation. You wake up with a belief that's been informed by the stuff that you watch and the people you talk to. And if you live in an entire ecosystem that is entirely pro-Trump, anti-Ukraine, pro-Russia, to greater or lesser degree, then that's going to be the opinion you're going to have. You don't have the opportunity to believe otherwise, because you're not interacting with any information that would disagree with that kind of worldview.
And if you like the idea of owning the libs, or even if you're on that spectrum, then this is very easy to package this stuff up as a victory for you, and a victory for your values, and a victory for your wallet. Even if, and this is the classic sort of quote about fascism, even if the evidence of your eyes tells you the exact opposite is having, you've fallen into a narrative bubble that convinces you things are otherwise. Or the worst case is that there are specific minorities, specific enemies that are preventing this ideal state of affairs from coming into existence. So expect to see more victimization of minority groups, othering, expect to see more chaos, because that's in the interests of a totalitarian slide. And this dismantling of institutions and institutional behavior in the US will accelerate. There's almost no resistance to it as far as I can tell, but also expect them to turn on Europe, because they will try to dismantle anything that provides an example of what they're lost or what they're deconstructing. It's why Putin attacked Ukraine in the first place, because he cannot stand a democratic system as an example existing and flourishing on Russia's borders, not just as a template for what Russia could potentially be, but simply because he does not control it and he cannot operate within its business model, a rule of law business model. It is going to be the same as Trump. Trump cannot envisage or imagine interacting with the EU, because his business rules, business environment are going to diverge too far from the rules that are in operation within the EU and the UK, and he's going to look to demolish them.
Yeah, and actually, that's the last kind of point I want to come on to. So I'm just going to do the last super chat, and then we'll get onto this, or last two. So Goose Springsteen says, on JF's point, ignoring nuclear risk, Europe can't sustain a kinetic military intervention in Ukraine against Russia without the US in any time frame that would actually help. I think that's broadly correct, although I guess
broadly correct as well. Yes,
without putting that to the test, we don't fully know.
No. We're slightly better on air power. I mean, there is going to be a major issue, isn't there, in terms of air defense, because clearly a lot of the advanced air defense stuff comes from the US, and alternative, laser-based energy systems are not developed enough. The ones in development, let's say in the UK, I don't think are advanced enough to take over from Patriots and so on. So there are clearly really problematic areas. But Europe, I think, has more of its air power available than, say, the ground forces that have been run down over the past couple of decades. So I'd take the point there, on the ground, that's probably not where we're going to intervene, but we could perhaps close the skies.
And actually, I'm disagreeing somewhat. Right. So right now, I think we are. I think Poland on their own could defeat Russia. So actually,
No,
if we put a European army, they are so like I was reporting things this morning. They like there was a flight of 100 to 150 soldiers from Yekaterinburg that were put on a flight that were all injured and were absolutely screwed, and they're being flown to the front line because they need people for the front line so desperately. There were people filling their quotas of recruitment by recruiting mentally ill, physically ill, and like alcoholics and stuff like that. People. So that's then you're getting these instances on the front line where these Russian commanders are punishing these people for being alcoholics or thieves, and like weapon. They can't send them to the military tribunals or whatever because they need them on the front line. So they're just punishing them by basically beating them up, tying into trees, all this kind of stuff. And it's because they're recruiting the most unfit for frontline
absolute
fighting. And so I think if Europe's army and air force came against Russia now, it would actually quite easily defeat it.
Yeah,
but of course,
at this point, right now,
right now, we wouldn't want to lose those people, and so it'd be. But like if you're just gaming it, I think we'd actually do quite an easy job overdone. So anyway,
the real risk is giving Russia a couple of years to rearm. US lifting sanctions, pumping
100%.
up Russia's war machine. And then they fill back up. Maybe they have a few little wars in Central Asia to gather resources in the meantime. So I'm with Goose on that.
I disagree with the first point. I think we can sustain a kinetic military intervention. I think we easily can in Europe. But his second point, materiel aside, there's no stomach for the casualties. That's the key, right? Like in principle, we could take them on, but it will cause lots of people to die, and so we're not going to do that. Julian Roster says, could
air power perhaps slightly less? Less if we can. But again, I'm not an expert in that area. But the sheer scale of troops we'd need is to make any difference, because Ukraine already has 800,000, 1 million men under arms. To make any difference there, even if it's to relieve areas that are not directly in the line of fire, you're going to need hundreds of thousands. I don't know if you've seen any quoted figures there, but you're going to need a huge amount of European troops.
Yeah. Absolutely. Could Vance be thank you, Julian, and thank you, Goose, as well. Could Vance be turned from the dark side, or is he too far gone? He is ideologically well gone. So if you listen to what he's been saying about unified executive theory and all sorts of stuff over the last couple of years, like he is Project 2025 to the hilt, and this man there's more chance of turning Trump than Vance. Honestly, Vance is your ideologue. Trump is I don't have any real true beliefs. I just listen to whatever I'm told. Just like Anakin
Rubio is the one who will, Rubio may well peel away at some point when it gets too much for him. I mean, he's clearly all these people like Lindsey Graham. They'll jettison almost anything to be in proximity to power, to maintain their status and privilege. But I think Rubio will have a point where he himself will be denigrated and humiliated to such an extent that he walks. Whether he walks and talks is different. But Vance, there's no moral bottom there. There's no bottom to that barrel that can't be scraped.
Two things to say on that. One, Vance was not always that way. So he did write, hillbilly elegy, and he did have a slightly, but he's now fully in that worldview. But with Marco Rubio, what's disappointing about Rubio is that as uncomfortable as he looked in that meeting yesterday, and as I think almost like not Stockholm syndrome, but he looks like he wants to make the sign. What's the universal sign of help me? I'm in trouble. That you can make people make it out of their cars or in like gas station toilets to say, look, I've been kidnapped. I can expect Rubio would be wanting to make that sign. Like some of the visuals of him in that seat yesterday in the Oval Office, he looked deeply uncomfortable. But then when he gets wheeled out onto the media afterwards, he's just towed the perfect party line with aplomb, like with real gusto. So it's just really disappointing. I think Rubio is a huge disappointment because he's going against everything that he's previously said in public over the last sort of 10 years.
And Lindsey Graham, no surprise, is a massive disappointment as well. The key question is, did Rubio know this was coming? Did he know the ambush was coming? And it's likely he did. I think it's likely that he would have known.
Yeah. So
And
the
he will
last,
win at some point. Yeah.
I know this has been a long one for you, but the last one is the big point, which is pivoting against Europe. So my whole, and I was speaking to my partner last night. Actually, we're just explaining what's going on. And I was saying, look, what you have here is a pivot towards Russia, but it's as much as a pivot against the EU. So the Project 2025, JD Vance, that kind of Steve Bannon worldview, they hate the EU. They're an alliance, they're collaborative, they are to some degree further left of where, even though they're actually centre right politically in the majority in the EU, but they're to the left of where these guys in America are. And they see the EU, and they have seen for a long time, as an enemy. Trump the other night said the EU was set up to screw us in the US over, which is incorrect, but that's how he sees it. These guys see especially Trump with his kind of zero-sum game nature and transactionalism, sees the EU as a competitor, not as an ally. You don't have allies. That's why he doesn't like NATO, the alliances. He doesn't understand positive sum game where we can both gain from this. He sees everything as like your gain is my loss. And so the EU is a competitor, slap on the tariffs, dismiss them, don't care about the EU. And that is absolutely true. So the pivot away from Russia, as far as I can see it, is pivot towards Russia is as much as as much of a pivot away from the EU. So we have got a realignment of the world. And although much of America won't agree with this, as in they don't see the EU in the same way and they disagree with what Trump's doing, Trump is the commander-in-chief at the moment. And he has taken the US away from the EU and towards Russia. So when the EU countries are meeting tomorrow and going forward, they need to understand that actually the Trump administration sees them as an enemy. And that needs to be factored into how they are sorting out their strategies and how robust they're going to be. I would suggest getting onto this quasi-war footing. I would suggest giving the $300 billion away and really going for this, you go hard or go home. Like a man to double business bound, said Shakespeare. You end up doing nothing if you're like, oh, do we do this or do that? Or no, this is what we need to do, and we need to go hard in there. And if we don't, we are going to lose out. And we've just got to bite the bullet and go full on for European independence from the US and support of Ukraine.
Yeah, that's right, and turn it into a massive own goal for Trump. And jettison some of the delusion that we still have clinging into old zombie institutions. That's not to say the US won't come back at some point. That's not to say that it's lost forever. It's not to say that things won't change. Trump is an old man, but at this point, we need a high degree of strategic independence. We need control over the munitions, and we need to clearly have them at some kind of scale where they have a real deterrent power against Russia, because again, the threat from Russia is not going away. Putin is also old, but no one can predict the day or the hour when he snuffs it, nor the way in which he snuffs it, whether it be in his bed, whether it be in a puddle of piss like Stalin, with people putting a pillow over his head to make sure he's dead and gone, or in a ditch like Gaddafi. We don't know how that's going to end. We may have our preferences, of course, but we have to plan for the worst. I think throughout this crisis, we have tried to normalize the abnormal, and we have hoped for the best, just in the way actually Putin has also hoped for a miracle at all the way through. The trouble is, the pendulum is tipping away from Russia's favor last year, and now it's tipping back in their favor with what's going on. But their economy is in a parlor state. Their military is in a parlor state. The data that you and I have been seeing suggests that over the last sort of 3 months at least, their ability to project violence, force, and mount offensives has consistently gone down.
Toretsk at the moment, even more today.
Yeah.
There's a counterattack in Toretsk, and the Ukrainians have taken even more of Toretsk today. So anyway, carry on.
If this trajectory carries on and we help Ukraine stay in the fight through 2025, it's conceivable that Russia will not be able to maintain its presence in Ukraine. It will have a form of collapse, at least on the battlefront, if not some internal disorder. That is the only conceivable way in which Ukraine will gain some semblance of justice and security. Trump's plan is not a plan for security or justice for Ukraine or for Europe, and we've got to wake up to that.
Yeah, 100% agree. And, kind of what Budanov was saying. So the problem would be I think we can support Ukraine to a victory. It's going to be hard, but I think we can. It depends how you define victory to prevail. Let's say that. The biggest challenge will be, and I think there's a high probability of this happening. Biggest challenge will be if Trump lifts sanctions on the US or on Russia. If Trump lifts US sanctions on Russia, that makes things incredibly difficult. And he's such a child that he would probably do that.
They're already making plans. I mean, the resumption of business ties with Russia, there are already numerous signs that this is the trajectory they're on. So again, we have to not sit around, will they, won't they?
Yeah.
We have to assume that he will. We'll have to assume the worst possible behaviors and plan accordingly, and not keep hoping for the best.
A problem, and I know we need to go, but problem being that if the EU keep their sanctions on and the US take their sanctions off, then actually EU businesses suffer against American businesses, and actually there's a competitive advantage for the US to lift their sanctions. That is really irritating. That's really annoying as well. But interestingly, Trump did extend the sanctions for a whole year the day after Starmer. So some people are connecting it. So that was amazing. But if he reverses that, then that sucks. RJK Spinning Wood, Richard, HBG politics. Can you give me another word to describe yesterday? As I keep saying, disgusting and despicable. Also, a lot of swearing. I would say fustercluck although I'd say that correctly, and I would say also the crossroads for the future of humanity. We're at that crossroads, really. I'll have to think on that. And
it's a cluster, and Vance is a cockwomble. How's that?
Yeah, the absolutely. Luckily, there was, for me at least, there was you got cut off as you said the F of that, and so it didn't come through, which is great. So because swearing is bad.
I said
right?
fudge. I said fudge.
Oh right, that's all right. I couldn't hear it. So yeah, but yes, a cockwomble picnic, as someone says, that is perfect. So anyway. That is fascinating to think about the future of Europe and the US and what's going to happen, and whether Europe just really comes together and does some majorly important things. Tomorrow is going to be the day that the future of this war gets, I think, dictated. It's probably a bad word, but you get my point. Is incredibly important tomorrow. We're going to be keeping a close eye on what happens. Jonathan, any kind of final thoughts?
No, I think this is an inflection point. If Europe hits the kind of snooze button tomorrow, we are in big trouble. If we see move towards mobilization by Europe of resources and giving up the idea of a US backstop, because it is not happening. Even if that sort of turd festival hadn't happened in the Oval Office yesterday, the US was not going to provide a military backstop to France and Britain. So we now need to get on with it unilaterally. If we see signs of that tomorrow, it's good. If we don't see signs of action tomorrow, then we could be on a very, very worrying trajectory.
Yeah, I completely agree. Look, thanks, Jonathan, for answering the call of the live. This means that I can now go and do my pub quizzing, and we've got a pretty good. We're always the bridesmaid and never the bride, so we keep coming second in these pub quizzes, and steward's inquiry and people having ringers and not happy with that. But
what's the category that gets you down? Is it pop music and sport? What's the one that lets you down?
I don't know. Actually, it's a good question. I don't know. I used to be really good at general knowledge. I used to be really good at a pub quiz. That sounds conceited, but I used to have this ability to have a wide range of knowledge that I could pick in it, delve into at will, and it would come to me, and answers and just knowledge generally. And I used to love that when I'd have like public debates on like philosophy and stuff. I would be really good at being able to work really quickly cognitively, and and operate in an awesome way, and I loved that. And then I got multiple sclerosis, and that's really affected my cognitive load. It's really affected my memory. So I'm good at stuff if I've got stimulus and things to work off, but when I'm on my own, like I struggle. So I can appear really quick and really good when I'm in this environment. If I do, I don't know, I do, but actually, MS has really taken a lot from me. So actually, I of the 4 people there, I actually struggle, and it like for me, it's personally like it makes me realize that my MS has taken its toll, because I'll be like, oh, I know that, and I just can't think of it. It just won't come. Things just won't come, and that sucks. So sucks to be me.
There's age as well. I have trouble recalling names since COVID, actually. Although it's got a lot better since I started the podcast and having to remember people's names and details.
Yeah, but you forget I'm only 27, so that's not a problem for me. You're like, what, 64 or something? So, you know,
75, Jonathan.
I choose to look like this because I think it looks cool. Like, that's the only reason I look much older.
Must take you many hours to put all that, you know, prosthetics on daily.
I'm glad you recognise this. Thank you very much to Rob. Really appreciate your support, my friend. Awesome source. Thank you. And Mr. Lion Dust, who's doing some great modding in there. Thank you, matey. I really appreciate you. That's a great super sticker. Thank you to all the live chatters and all the people who have also contributed. That's really kind of you.
Everybody
and
is.
I was just going to say, please remember, Jigger Sport. That's it. I knew it was something. The links in the description below. I'm sure Jonathan Fink will put his description in when he uploads this video, and help out with that wonderful charity who are an amazing bunch of people. And remember, it was a really tough day yesterday, probably for a lot of us. But actually, I don't know that it's a bit like lancing a ball, like I keep saying, that actually better out. Now it's out in the open. We can get on. I think there's more clarity now to what needs to be done, Jonathan. And I think maybe that might help us kind of psychologically in how we deal with this. Keep smiling, guys. And one thing is for certain, Doris is going to make some serious appearances in terms of analogies going forward. I'm absolutely sure. For those who know my analogies, Doris is going to be featuring. Thank you, J&J. Stars shifted the last couple of days. It's going to be a rocky sail. Take care, friends. So let's all stick together, and thank you. Jonathan, Slava Ukraini.
Heroям slava.
Absolutely, and thanks for joining from UCAR, my friend. Stay on the line. For everyone else, you take care. Thank you so much for being here, and give some love to the Ukrainians and Jigger Sport. Toodle pips.
Hug a Ukrainian. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.